Hello and welcome to another episode of Stageworthy. I am Phil Rickaby, the host and producer of this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like this episode. And if you've enjoyed the episodes that I've presented you so far, make sure to subscribe and hit that little bell icon so that every time I drop an episode, you'll get a notification that a new episode of Stageworthy is available. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure that you are subscribed. Go to your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you choose, and make sure that you hit the little subscribe button. That way, whenever I drop a new episode, it will be delivered directly to your device. This week, I will be continuing my conversation with a fringe artist. This is my first full-length conversation with a fringe artist. We will also have on Thursday another fringe extra where I will be presenting shorter interviews with 4 fringe artists. So if you missed the first 2, those were released on the past 2 Thursdays, episode 1 and episode 2 of the Fringe Extras, with the 3rd episode coming up this Thursday as you listen to this. But this is my first full-length conversation with a fringe artist. Before I get to who that is, let's make sure to talk about my Patreon. I can't do this show without the patrons who've chosen to back this show. There are costs involved with producing a podcast. Even though I give this podcast to you for free, things regarding this podcast do cost me money. Things like hosting the audio, the website, editing software, and all kinds of other things. In fact, I've recently stopped offering transcripts because it was taking too much work to clean up the transcripts that I was getting. There are services that are better, but those are paid services. And I'm just covering my costs right now. All of the work that I put into Stageworthy and producing Stageworthy, including the fringe extras, which take a lot of work to do the interviews and assemble the podcasts and get those ready. As with my regular episodes, those all cost time. Each episode is maybe 3 hours of work each after the interview. And that's time that I'm not being paid for. We are just covering the costs right now and not the cost of transcripts, which is why I stopped offering them. Like I said, there are paid services, but in order to be able to have quality transcripts, I need more backers for the Patreon. And the Patreon is how I'm able to cover the costs. And for my backers, I'm providing early access to episodes as well as discussions about issues that might be coming up. If there's an issue I want to discuss, if there's things that I think are important, we'll talk about them on the Patreon so that we can figure out if maybe I'm on the right track or am I wrong in what I'm thinking. This is basically the trusted brain trust of Stageworthy, where we will get decisions about what topics and how to cover them will be discussed. I do need more backers if I'm going to add transcripts. If I'm ever going to be paid for my time, I need your help to do that. So please, if you like this podcast, if you find value in Stageworthy, go to patreon.com/Stageworthy and become a backer. It's just $7 Canadian each month to become a backer and help me make this podcast. My guest this week is Ben Yoganathan. Ben is an actor, writer, and director. Ben is the writer of Zeitgeist, which is being presented as part of the Toronto Fringe Festival. Zeitgeist is being presented at Cinecycle in Toronto. It's a non-standard venue, so make sure to check that out as well. It sounds like a really exciting place to perform and to see theater. So this is my conversation with Ben Yoganathan. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to ask you about the show Zeitgeist, which will be at the Toronto Fringe this year. Tell me what's the pitch for Zeitgeist?
So Zeitgeist is a show that I wrote that follows 6 20-somethings in the wake of graduating from university as they navigate life, identity, and purpose in a world on fire, and kind of what it means to be a young person in the world today, and how in the wake of insane global political, socioeconomic, technological problems, we can maybe hang on to each other a little deeper, a little harder, and form community, and how that community allows us to become a little bit more sane, a little bit more humane, a little bit more connected, and yeah, how that can help us find our place in the world.
Oh, and what I mean, obviously, the world being what it is, that acts as a bit of an inspiration for the show.
Mm.
How did this show come to you?
Um, so I started writing this show when I was in my third year of university. I think it was the earliest versions of the text that I have for it that existed in like a big Google Doc. Um, yeah, it came when it was kind of the middle of the pandemic. I was in school, and I sort of started writing this story about two people kind of finding each other post graduation and forming, kind of this very intense connection. And I sort of kept chipping away at this idea for a while, and then maybe about a year and a half later, my partner was like, "Oh, have you ever seen that movie Before Sunrise?" And I was like, "No, I haven't, but I've heard of it." And then she showed it to me, and then it was kind of an infuriating experience because it was exactly the thing that I wanted to write, and it was already done, and it was gonna be better than anything I was ever gonna do, so it was, yeah, kind of a shock for me to see that, but then I sort of kind of went down a wormhole and started just consuming all of these, depictions of youth and youth culture, specifically on film. Movies like The Graduate or, Francis Ha, Reality Bites, like all these movies that are so a part of like the canon now and kind of began to influence me and kind of began to also um, inspire me, but in a way that was kind of oppressive, I want to say. I was like, it's so interesting to come of age at a time when you have access to all these depictions of like what it means to be a young person and what that time in your life is supposed to be like. And yeah, so I wanted to create something that would kind of riff on those ideas, but took it to um, I guess another place and tried to make it relevant to the experiences of me and all of my friends today because I found that all of the like core struggles that you struggle with just as like a person and a young person are kind of the same and have always been the same. But the particularity of our situation right now and the amount of information we have access to and are just inundated with every day is like very unique. So I wanted to create um, kind of an homage to those movies and pieces of culture that already exist, but also mash it up in a way that feels more contemporary and more like the insanity of being alive right now. If that makes
It's
any
kind of
sense.
interesting to me. You described having access to all of these depictions of what it's like growing up and sort of being
Mhm.
like a young person, being a teenager. And I find it what I find interesting about it is that yes, there's all of these depictions, but all of them are completely fictionalized, right? They're like
Mhm.
they are divorced from reality in that they still have to be entertaining. So they have to have action, they have to have movement. Whereas
Totally.
a lot of times being a young person is an exercise in boredom and just like
Totally.
dealing with like I don't know what to do, so I guess I'm just gonna sit here.
Yeah, it's completely that. Yes.
Like I was thinking about, I mean, I grew up in the '80s, so a lot of the movies were they like the John Hughes movies
Oh
of
yeah.
the day. And as somebody like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 60 Candles, and like The Breakfast Club, and as a teenager, I did barely resonated with those movies. Like,
Mm.
and it was kind of weird that looking back, people are like, yeah, I remember like high school was like that, and I kind of go like,
Yeah.
no,
It
it
wasn't though. You
it
remember it
wasn't.
that way, but it wasn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. In terms of that, um, What are, like, you kind of mentioned the Before Sunrise and some of the movies. Is there one of the movies that sort of depicts youth? Such a old man thing to say, but is there one of those movies that sort of depicts youth that sort of stands out for you as like this movie is kind of like a seed of Zeitgeist?
I mean, Before Sunrise for sure was like the beginning of it because I kind of decided I was like, that's a great idea, and it kind of gave me a lot of freedom, so I was just like, "I'm just gonna steal that idea. I'm just gonna take it." The idea of just, like that's the kind of how the first act of the play starts, is just 2 people kind of bump into each other and have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and over the course of those 30 minutes, we as an audience kind of discover that, like, oh, they have feelings for each other, and they get along, and maybe this progresses somewhere else, and maybe, um it doesn't, so I kind of stole that idea, and then as it moves into the middle third of the play, so they meet at this art gallery and they kind of strike up a conversation, like I said, and then at the end of that conversation, she says, "I'm having a party later, like, if you wanna come, but my friends are gonna be there, it'll be fun." So then they go to this party, and then the play kind of turns into this series of vignettes almost where we kind of drop in and out of different conversations the way life kind of happens at a party where you kind of go in knowing one person or a group of people and then you kind of end up talking to different folks so the night goes in ways that you don't quite expect so that's kind of the middle third of the play is kind of dipping in and out of these conversations and yeah, in terms of an influence there's 2 Noah Baumbach movies. The first one is Frances Ha, which I think is a perfect movie, and also does a really good job at, um, kind of trying to do what I'm doing in this show of commenting on, um, the fact that most of your life I don't know, maybe most of your life, full stop, but most of your life in your 20s is that feeling of, like, waiting for something to happen, waiting for something to arrive, waiting for, like, the big thing to occur, and it doesn't. Like, most of it is just you're working your day job or, you're watching a movie with your roommate when you're supposed to be doing your laundry. And then, yeah, there's a great sequence in that movie where she, like, on a whim buys like a plane ticket to Paris for like a weekend on like a credit card. And she kind of goes to Paris being like, this is gonna be a great weekend. And I'm gonna be in Paris. I'm gonna read all these great books. And then she gets there and she like sleeps in and then she wakes up and it's 3 PM the next day, and she's like, "Oh, man, I have to get on a flight tomorrow, and I've wasted half the day." And then she's, like, wandering around Paris, like, calling people that she knows that live there, and, like, everyone's busy or unavailable. So she's kind of walking around by herself, and it's just, like, a series of unfortunate events, like, she goes to see a movie, but, like, all the movies have already started, so she's, like, not really doing anything. And then she, like, flies back home the next day, and she gets a call from her friend. She's like, "Oh my god, this is so perfect. We're having all these people over tonight, and there's all these amazing artists that are gonna be there, and you should totally come. It's such great timing that you're in Paris." And it's such a great sequence because it's like, I feel like that's so much of your life in your 20s is just, like, having this expectation of, like, this is when the big thing happens, this is when I am gonna fall in love or, do my big thing or have my big break, and then it's just a day-to-day, um, grind of living, which I think there's beauty in that, and I think there's goodness in that, and I don't know, maybe we shouldn't expect so much. I don't know, I kinda went on a tangent there.
No, it's great. One of the things that I'm thinking about is, you spend those days when you're in high school thinking that as soon as you graduate, your life's going to take off. You're going to get that great job. All your dreams are going to come true. You're going to meet that person. Your life is going to be this one thing. And kind of because the media told you that, your parents, at least in my day, our parents kind of like made it sound like, yeah, you graduate and everything's going to be golden. And you get out into the world and you just sort of exist. And it's the shock of like, oh, I'm in control of my life at the moment in a way. Like if I don't get up, if I don't wake myself up and go and go to work, then I don't go to work. That's my choice. Like nobody's gonna
Yeah,
be there being like, get up, go. Um, and a lot of us are kind of just unprepared for that. Like
totally.
that absolute freedom of adulthood to be like, oh, everything is on me now.
Mhm.
I don't know what to do with that. And that's again, because we have this idea like, oh, my life begins at graduation and in my
Yeah,
20s, all this thing is going to happen. When it doesn't, and you sort of like reach like 30, it's kind of like, did I fail? You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I
100%.
remember going the year I turned 27, I thought I've accomplished nothing. My life is over. And it's a
Yeah,
weird thing to have that realization at 27 and just be like, oh wait, like a couple years later, just thinking like, oh, that I'm just starting. Like that's
yeah,
nothing.
like, 27 isn't actually that old at all.
30 isn't that old, but yet when you're
Yeah,
like in high school, 30 feels ancient.
that feels yeah, like it's the end of the end of the road there. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the venue for Zeitgeist because it's not one of the standard venues. Tell me about the venue and why you chose that.
Yeah, so the venue is, called Cinecycle. It's, this sort of underground cinema, art event space, and, bicycle repair shop down on Spadina and Adelaide. I picked it because, I applied to the main Fringe lottery and didn't get in this year, so then I decided to go with the unconventional venue category, and I was looking around and because of kind of fringe rules and also, just my own preference, I was like, we could do it because the movie references movies so much, and there are a lot of projections and things like that. I was like, if we did it in like a movie theater, that might be a fun way to sort of tie in the play to the actual space that the audience is in. So I was kind of looking around for spaces, and I looked at like the Paradise on Bloor or like the Revue Cinema, and I was like, those are fine, but those venues are, like, a little swanky, and they're, like, kind of huge too, so I was like, from a, just practical perspective, I was like, "I don't know if we're gonna fill those houses." Um, and then I just, like, Googled, like, independent indie movie theaters Toronto, and I came across this, like, weird website for this place called Cinecycle, and then I was looking at photos, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's perfect." So then I called them, and then this 85-year-old British man named Martin answers the phone, and he's like, "Yeah, so he runs Cinecycle. He founded it in 1993, I think. He came here from the UK. He loves biking and fixing up bikes, so they still do that there. And also, he loves movies, so he has like an old 35 millimeter projector, a 16 millimeter projector. And they've just been, he's kind of just started it as like screening movies for his friends. And then I think eventually, like some indie filmmakers got involved, so then they started screening their stuff there. And then it kind of just became this hub for like indie filmmakers in Toronto to screen their stuff for like, cinema clubs and societies to do screenings and discussions and things like that. Um, so recently it got taken over by the CFMBC, which is the Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Center. So they're kind of running the whole thing now. And yeah, they're a super amazing organization. They're the biggest distributor of independent film in Canada, and they have like this massive collection of Canadian independent film. And yeah, they're working with us pretty closely on this. We kind of um, negotiated using the space with them in terms of they're doing a big renovation right now, so we were like, okay, if we can do this show here, it's something that you guys have never done before. And we can bring in a lot of new folks to see the space. The Fringe is like a great creative hub and there's a great community around it. And I really am in love with the space. And I think that a lot of people are going to want to use it and be in it once they see it. And yeah, and the CFMBC is just being really wonderful and um, kind of letting us do whatever we want in there for the next couple of months. So
Nice.
yeah, that is the
Are
space.
are you getting to rehearse in that space?
Yes, which is a real treat, especially for yeah, unconventional venue. category because we're going to be in a proscenium and we're kind of using the whole space, and there's a screen on one end which there's going to be some projections on. Yeah, so it's really a privilege, especially for a fringe show, because often fringe shows are not in the space until tech, and then you have like 4 hours for tech, and then you
Yeah.
kind of just got to roll with the punches. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Fringe tech is usually very much an acquired skill. It
Oh,
is
totally.
something
Yeah.
that I think a lot of times it's people's first fringe. They completely blow their tech,
Oh yeah.
not quite choreographing and understanding exactly what has to happen in that time.
Mhm.
I've seen plenty of people who are like, yeah, we didn't get a run through in, and we're kind of winging our first performance because we didn't get all through our tech.
Oh yeah.
So it's a real gift to have like this space for a lot of time beforehand.
Mhm.
Um, Speaking of Fringe, the Toronto Fringe is one of my favorite time of year. It's like theater Christmas. It's like this great opportunity. I love the Fringe, and I've been able to experience a bunch of fringes in different places. What is your relationship with Fringe, whether it's Toronto Fringe or other fringes?
Yeah, I mean, this is gonna be my third Fringe. So yeah, I've been doing Fringe for a while. I love it. My first Fringe was 2 years ago, with Mixtape Projects doing their show Killing Time, which was amazing. We got nominated for a Dora for that show. We got patrons pick. So yeah, it was really great. And last year I did an immersive show at Supermarket called 86 Me, with Dead Raccoon Theater. We also sold out a run, so that was amazing. Yeah, and this year, in addition to writing and directing my own Fringe show, I'm also in another Fringe show. So I'm double dipping in Fringe this year. I'm going to be in a show called Iris Says Goodbye, which is with Mixtape who did Killing Time. So we're going to be at Soul Pepper this year. So yeah, I love the Fringe. I think it's really a special time, just in the city in general. But if you're in the theater community in the city, it's like it's the best 2 weeks. And yeah, I mean, other than seeing all the shows and seeing all of the voices that get represented and get to be on stages that normally aren't heard from, especially in mainstream theater, mainstream Canadian theater in the city, like the Fringe is so democratic in a way because it's completely random. Like truly anybody can get in. You have like people that have been doing this for like a long time that are producing, really amazing, well polished, great shows. And, people who are like, I wrote a show in my bedroom. I wrote this one person show and I got into the Fringe, and that's amazing. And they kind of get like a new audience and a new following. And then you get to go to the Fringe patio and it's like all of your friends are there and the whole
Yeah.
community turns out. And yeah, it's just such a positive environment. Everyone's really just trying to hype each other up and lift each other's shows up. And yeah, truly, it's like one of the few times of the year where everyone is just there for the art, just to see shows and be supportive. And yeah, I love the
100%.
Fringe.
Yeah. It's one of those great, opportunities, like you said, like, you could discover somebody new, like, the opportunity to see somebody who's never done anything before and might be completely brilliant
Mhm.
is exciting, and this year, I love the Fringe hub that they're building with Soul Pepper.
Oh yeah,
Like, it sounds like from what they've described, it sounds a little bit like a return to the days when the permanent home for the patio was Honest Ed's parking lot just in the back, which for what I don't even it felt like this is where the Fringe belongs, in this place.
right.
And it was just this huge, like, there's so much space, so many opportunities to meet people. And
Hmm.
I feel like this is an opportunity to get back to that. And so I'm looking forward to having at least 3 venues at Soul Pepper, I think, which
Yes,
is
yeah,
like to have like venues that are so close together, which is something that you find in like the Edmonton Fringe and the Winnipeg Fringe, where
mm,
most of the venues are like in a finite area that you can pretty much walk across in 10 minutes, which is
right,
a gift considering the distance between some of the theaters in Toronto.
totally.
We've all had to make that wild sprint to get from Tarragon to Factory at
Yeah,
least once.
people really pack their fringe schedule is pretty tight, which I get. I mean, I get it. There's always a lot of shows that you're like, you need to see. So yeah.
I always forget to plan for food. I always forget
Oh,
to
true.
schedule lunch. So I'll, like, be like 5 shows in being like, "Why am I starting to get so annoyed by everything?" And I realize,
Yeah,
"You didn't plan for lunch.
exactly. You're
You
like,
need to eat something." So you end up being like, "Do I bail on a show? Do I wolf something down quickly?" It's one of those. I don't know, I think a lot of people do the same thing.
oh, totally, yeah. And then you're sitting there and you're like, do I actually not like this show, or am I just irritated because I'm
Am I
hungry?
just hungry?
Yeah. No, but it's and then
Ben,
no, go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm curious, about, your theater journey outside of, like, Fringe and some of the other stuff. How did you start getting interested in Fringe or sorry, how did you start getting interested in theater, and what drew you in?
Um, yeah, when did I start doing theater? Well, I mean, my parents always enrolled me and my sister in, like, a lot of extracurriculars when I was a kid, so I was in, like, karate and basketball and choir. And choir was, like, one of the things that kinda stuck around for a while, so I knew how to sing. I learned how to sing when I was super young, but I didn't really do, like, community theater or anything like that. And then I started doing theater, I think it was my first year of high school, because one of my friends was in theater, and he's like, "It's kinda cool, you should try this out." And I was like, "Alright, sure." I did the school play, and then I think I immediately I what I fell in love with was the community of it. I mean, I think that's mostly I mean, obviously, like, I do theater professionally now and I act professionally, but I'm like, yeah, maybe half of it for me is just the community of people and being in that group of people. So yeah, I started doing it in high school. And then just kind of couldn't stop. Like those people just became my friends, and then that thing slowly just kind of engulfed all of the other things. So then by fourth year of high school, that was the only thing that I did. I like just dropped everything out of my life that wasn't that, and any people in my life that weren't those people. So yeah, by the time I got to grade 12, I was kind of pretty clear. I was like, I need to go to theater school. That's what I need to do. I've put all my eggs in this one basket, so I might as well go for it. And then I took a year off. I had some like health complications, so I was off for a year and kind of it was my gap year. So I was just working and just living at home, which at the time I hated because I was like, I felt so ready. Like I was like, oh my God, I need to get out and I need to go do my thing and I need to move to Toronto and I need to be in a big city and that's what I need to do. But looking back on it, obviously I'm super grateful for it. Um, so yeah, then I went to Ryerson um, for 4 years. Middle of that was the pandemic, so that was like a really interesting turn in my theater education. Again, hated it when it was happening, but looking back in hindsight, that seems to be a theme. Like, I don't know if maybe that's just life as you go through like hard things and in the moment you're like, I wish this was happening to anybody but me. And you look back and you're like, no, that was good. Mhm.
You mentioned that you wanted to move to Toronto. Where were you at that point that you were, like, chomping at the bit to, like, get to Toronto?
Where was I? Oh,
Yeah.
I grew up in Guelph. Yeah, like I was originally born in Sri Lanka, but I moved here when I was super young, like 4 or 5. So I basically grew up in Guelph, went to school there. So like not far from Toronto. So I'd been there. I'd been to the city. I knew what it was. But at that point, when I was in grade 12, I was like taking the Greyhound with my friends to come to Toronto like every other weekend because I was just like, I gotta get out of this sleepy town, classic small town story. But no, growing up in Guelph was nice. Now I'm here in Toronto and I'm like, I go back to Guelph and I need a break from the insanity. Um,
I think sometimes when you are, you know, growing up in a small town, it doesn't matter how close you are to the big city. Even
yeah,
if it's like a 30-minute drive or it's gonna take, like, an hour on the bus or whatever it is, um, it looms so large, and it's so much more exciting than the small town that you grew up in. I think everybody who grew up outside of Toronto kind of has that feeling, because I can remember in high school, skipping school on a Friday and like just going downtown with some friends. All the things that, now as a mature adult, I shouldn't have been doing, but whatever, I was dumb. We did it anyway. Um, but that's because the city seemed more exciting than the place where we were.
Mhm,
Um, but then, you mentioned, Guelph sometimes seems a little nice. And I think there is some theater out there. I think
mhm.
there is some. So it's like,
There's a
um,
lot of great community theater in Guelph, and I mean, I owe a lot to them. I did community musical theater in Guelph. I did, like, other community theater plays in Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, so, like, I owe a lot to those places. I mean, they kind of, yeah, got me through high school and through that gap year and, like, fostered my love for doing this thing, so, yeah, those are super important.
was there a moment, you were sort of doing theater in high school? Um, was there a moment when you kind of realized this was something that somebody could do? Like, this isn't just this doesn't have to just be a hobby. You can do this.
Yeah, I remember particularly, I was, like I think it was, like, on we had, like, a careers class, like, you remember that class where they, like, make you plan out what you wanna do? This is crazy, it's a crazy class to have in high school. But anyways, I was like, I don't know, I was just kinda thinking, I was like, "What am I good at? Like, what am I" and at that point, I was, like, kind of in grade 11, so pretty much all I did was theater. Everything else was, like, pretty marginal. I remember the last year I had to take, like, math or something, and I was completely failing, and I begged my teacher to pass me. I was like, I don't think you'll understand. I'm never gonna take math again in my life. Like, I just need you to give me the minimal percentage to pass." And he did. He took mercy on me, so grateful to him. But, yeah, I remember reading this book by no, I saw a YouTube video of this guy called Larry Moss, who was I guess he's like a pretty famous acting coach. He does a lot of, coaching for movies and things like that. It was like an interview of him just talking about like the craft of acting. And I remember watching that and I was like, is there because I never like I just never put that together. I never put together like the people you see in movies or in plays. Like it's like a thing that you can study and that you can do, and it's like a technical thing that you can get better at. I kind of was just like, oh, you just go on stage and you're just kind of up until that point, it was totally just fun for me. Like it was just completely fun, and I just loved doing it. So I didn't put that together, and I went out and I like got a book of his, and I remember I don't know where I was, but I remember buying the book and there was like a coffee shop or something next door, and I went and I started reading the book, and I read the entire book that day in one sitting because it was just like I like the good version of Pandora's box is when you open something and you're just like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." Like I didn't know there's this whole world out there and this thing that yeah, kind of made me so excited. I was like, "Okay, this is a thing that you can really do. You can get better at this. You can maybe try and make a living doing this." And then, yeah, everything after that was kind of I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole because, yeah, he was like, "You should read all these plays." And I started reading plays and, start reading Tennessee Williams and you start reading all these things. And then, one thing leads to another. You start connecting a bunch of ideas and you're like, okay, this is what it means to be an actor. This is what it means to be in the theater. This is kind of how you do this thing. Yeah, so that was kind of the moment for me.
You mentioned that class that they do, when you're making essentially what school is telling you, this is the decision that's gonna be like your whole life, which, like you said, it's insane that we ask
Crazy.
kids in grade 12 to do this. Like,
Wild.
make the decision that you're gonna study this thing, and we assume that's what you're gonna do for the rest of your life.
It's great, and
It's
you're 17, like, can you
Yeah.
imagine? That's wild. It's
And
crazy.
I listen, I knew what I wanted to do, much like yourself. Like, I knew, but I was surrounded by people who were like, my dad says I should study business, like people who just didn't know
Totally.
what to do. And I can remember, I don't know what your school was like, but when I told my guidance teacher that, um, I wanted to study theater, and they were like, "I don't know how to help you."
Oh, totally, yeah, they were like, "We got nothing for you. We got nothing for
Yeah,
you."
they were like, "Would you like have you considered a BA in English?" And I was like, "No, I
Yeah,
wanna go to theater school." And they were
yeah,
like, "I have no idea
no
what the
idea.
steps for that are."
Totally. Because it's really niche, like, it's like the amount of people that do theater in high school is, like, very narrow. Then, like, the amount of people out of that, like, seriously consider pursuing it is, like, even smaller. And then
Yeah.
those people that make it through theater school and then continue to pursue it is, like, even smaller. So the margin, it just keeps narrowing and narrowing and narrowing.
It 100% keeps narrowing, and I there's as you get older in your theater career, you start to realize more and more people are dropping off because
So
it takes, you know, and there comes a point where you are unwilling to make the sacrifices to, um, start in a like, you don't wanna upend your life and go to another city and have nothing. Like, how do I pay for my apartment? I
yes,
don't. Like,
yeah,
all of these things
100%.
where you're like, I'm tired of eating ramen for dinner. I don't wanna sleep on a
Yeah.
couch, like, all of these
Yeah,
things. And so, not only do some people not make it their first year out of theater school, but just, like, as, 30, 35, like, those years sort of pass, and fewer and fewer people from the graduating class are even, like, in the industry anymore.
totally, yeah.
How many people graduated from your class? Because I we started with 30, and I think we
Oh.
graduated with 14.
Yeah, we had, like, a similarly big class starting out. I think it was not quite 30, but I think we started with, like, 25, 26. We had I think once we graduated, it was probably closer to 20, so still a big class, honestly, bigger than yours when you graduated.
Yeah. No, there were a couple of years. I remember when I started theater school, there was a class of 7 that was graduating, and it was,
Well,
like, very like, they'd whittled down, like, a lot of people. But then
yeah.
again, in those I don't know, I don't a lot of theater schools I hear aren't doing this anymore, but they would cut people
Yeah,
at, like, Christmas and the end of the year,
mhm,
um, which I still kinda have a lot of bitterness towards, like, those people who were cut. They were essentially told, "We don't think that you will have a career in the theater," which is quite a leap for somebody to make
yeah,
when you're, like, in your early 20s to make the decision for you.
totally.
Like, and I from what I'm hearing, that doesn't happen so much in a lot of the schools, and I'm really thankful for that.
Mhm. Where did you go to school, if I can ask?
I was at, George Brown,
You were at George Brown, okay.
no, George Brown, theater school, but I was accepted there and at Ryerson.
You
I chose
chose
George
George Brown,
Brown,
right.
um, but again, I think it's the same in a lot of for a lot of the schools at that point. Like, they took in 30 people, assuming they were going to kick a bunch of those people out, so they would
Yeah,
have like a smaller class.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I was at Ryerson and TMU now, and I think they stopped doing that maybe 2 years ago?
mm,
Yeah, but that's, like, a bigger shift, I think, like, the pedagogy of theater schools is, like, really shifting. Overall, I think in a good
mm,
direction. I think, um I don't know, I kinda had to, um question my initial impulse here because I was really kind of a hard ass going into theater school. I think I've mellowed out a bit, and I think I really was like, oh, absolutely. Like you should absolutely be cut. And if you're cut from the program, I guess you just can't hack it. And
yeah,
that was sort of my mentality going in. And I remember hearing that they weren't going to do that anymore. And I was like, I don't know, I was kind of upset. I was like, "Well, like, the standards are really kind of falling, I guess." But now I look at it and I'm like, "That's kind of insane that I thought that or that I felt like I don't know, that was the only way that you could teach people to be better was to put them in a culture of kind of fear where, like, at any moment you could be gone." And, like, in what way is that conducive to learning anyways?
no, it's exactly right. And also, I think it sort of goes along with hand in hand with the sort of a certain school of thought as far as like acting
Mhm,
schools go, and people like sort of taught the way they were taught, right? And
mhm,
I mean, when I was in theater school, they would say they would say, "So we're going to tear you down so we can build you
Yeah,
back up."
classic.
And they
Yeah.
spent a lot of time tearing us down, and sort of never got around to the whole
Yeah.
build you back up sort of thing. And so it's like a whole like, oh, so we just not only do you like make us feel like shit, but now we're gonna go through our school year, except for a few who were like the golden children. Um, the rest of us have to like just live in fear of whether or not we're gonna be cut, which is a terrible way to make art.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Um, yeah, I think it's moving, in a good direction where you don't have to make people suffer. You don't have to, did you get the like you must have gotten like the, hey, if you're gonna do this, you're gonna miss weddings, you're gonna miss funerals, and that's just the way it is. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
no, you shouldn't. You
No,
absolutely shouldn't. Don't miss weddings. Do not miss
don't
funerals.
don't miss your life,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
that's I think the
don't.
thing. Like, just it is yes, it is a career, it's a vocation, but like don't miss the important things in your life
Seriously.
for this, you know? Um we they gave us a lot of uh if you could do something else,
Yeah.
do that, you know? And it's like, yeah, sure, we could do something else. I can do customer service, I can wait tables, fine. That's not what I love,
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. But I want to actually talk to you about your creation residency. Were you in Zurich?
Yeah, I was.
How long for?
I was there for oh man, I was there for like 2 months. So it was a while. Yeah, I cold emailed a bunch of theater companies when I got out of Ryerson, kind of in my in between time. I was lucky enough to kind of start working in the city a bit. I did some stuff with Driftwood. I did some stuff with the Howland Company. So I was kind of like hitting my stride, it felt like. And then, like so many actors, it's like you have that kind of period where you're working. And then it was like, boom, I was unemployed for like 6 months. And I was like absolutely devastated. So then I was like, oh, maybe I need to like just maybe I need to get out of the city. Maybe I need to get out of Toronto. I feel like I know everybody here. I kind of know the scene pretty well after having lived here. So I was emailing a bunch of companies in Europe and just being like, hey, can I come just like be with you guys? I'll pay my own way. If I can sit in a rehearsal or make you coffee, like anything, literally anything, I'll do it. And I got a response from this company in Zurich, and we kind of went back and forth. They're called Xperi Theater. They're like a BIPOC theater collective working a lot in like physical theater. Grotowski is their main thing, which is Grotowski was a Polish theater practitioner, and his whole thing was that the actor should be able to create any scene, any circumstance totally with their bodies and their instrument. And there shouldn't really be kind of any sets or any lighting. And the whole theatrical illusion can be created just between the audience and the actor. So it's very physical, it's very intense. And they're a traveling company that kind of sets up and takes down their stages pretty easily and quickly, and is pretty mobile. So we went kind of back and forth with them, trying to organize time for me to come over. I managed to get some Canada Council funding. So I went over there, and then I very quickly realized that I didn't like these people very much. The way that they worked, or just the way that they were. It was, to put it, to make a long story short, it was very culty, and it was very much a cult of personality in terms of the two people that ran it, and all of the other young people there kind of lived and died by whatever these two people said. These two older folks, little bit like theater school, just a little bit. Um, but then I was mainly there because I pitched to the Canada Council that I wanted to um, create a one-person show about my personal migration experience and how that ties into just the global migrant crisis we find ourselves in. Um, so then I kind of just put my head down and started working on that, which proved to be a really fruitful experience. So that I came out of it with like this 40-minute show that was really this stream of consciousness monologue, like in the vein of, I guess, like Spalding Gray, which is like a huge inspiration for me, um, about just migration and what it means to leave home, and the feeling of kind of being in another place and feeling completely lost and detached from your own community, and what that means and how that's such an experience for so many people worldwide. And yeah, so that was my experience there.
Aside from working with that company, did you get to experience theater in Berlin at all?
I did, yeah. So I saw some stuff in Zurich that was like touring in from Germany, which was really great. And yeah, I went to Berlin at the end of the month just to see some theater there, which is really great. I mean, here's the thing. It was like, I don't know, circling back, like this all kind of connects, but like circling back to that thing of like, when you're younger and it's like the big city is like never close enough and you always feel like it's bigger and better in some ways, and then you kind of experience that coming out of theater school. Like my thing, like when I graduated theater school, like everybody wanted to go to Berlin, everybody wants to go to Berlin because it's sort of seen as this kind of like, this mecca of like theater and the art scene, and everything's really well funded, and the theater there is super experimental and avant-garde. And I'm like, in some ways it is, but it's not like it really is a grass is greener situation. And I'm glad I went, and I'm glad I saw it, because I did see some really interesting shows, and they were playing with form in a way that was really interesting. But in terms of the kinds of stories that were getting told, um, and by who, and in terms of the diversity of the stories and the diversity of people on stage, like they are way behind, decades behind. And I think it's partially, I think like the historical context of for how long theater and theater culture has been around in Europe has allowed them to develop an audience that is just more perceptive and able to take theater that just isn't like we're in a room and it's very just like proscenium and there's a fourth wall and very realistic, very kitchen sink drama. Like they're, you know, more free to mess around because of the history they have and the culture they have. Um, but in terms of the stories that are getting told, it's like much narrower. And then I feel like in Canadian theater, it's like the opposite, where the form is very kind of tame a lot of the time, very standard. But in terms of the diversity of the stories that are getting told, especially in Toronto, it's like it's incredible. So yeah.
Yeah. I have in my day job, I have coworkers who work out of Berlin, and one of them was in
Mm,
Toronto and was looking at theater prices in Toronto, and was complaining because he said in Germany, the idea that there are not subsidized tickets for anybody who wants them is unthinkable.
mhm, mhm,
That like it should be affordable for everybody because the government subsidizes the theater in a certain way. And that always sort of struck me in that that's if you have a history of theater, then that's something that can grow out of it. It becomes like an important thing to the culture. On
totally,
the other side, as you're saying, you people get really tied to history
100%.
and
Yeah.
the way that we've always done it. And these are the kinds of people that we usually see on stage. So that's the kind of people that we're usually going to see on stage. And
Mhm,
you get sort of stuck in the history of it. And it's nice to find a balance of like we could subsidize the tickets and see
mhm,
a lot of diversity on the stage and tell some really interesting stories. It could be a lot of
mhm.
those things.
Totally. It's the thing I always said was like, in terms of like the American theater or the European theater is like they have such like they have this canon that's kind of already built, and they have these great plays and they have these great playwrights and these institutions that are like ancient, and they're like these monoliths, but it's like it's very, very hard to get your foot in the door of those institutions. I mean, it's hard here, but it's like imagine like, Soul Pepper, but it has like 200 years of history behind it. It's like you can't even imagine. And the nice thing about Canadian theater is that it's happening. It's happening right now. Like all of, a lot of our great writers are still alive. Most of them are still alive. Hannah Moscovich is still alive. Daniel McIver is still alive. Thompson Highway is still alive. Like all of these people are still alive. Like the Canadian theater is like still happening. So it feels a little bit. It still feels as a young person kind of impossible to get your foot in the door, but also it feels like it's still happening. It doesn't feel like there's as much weight of these old institutions. I don't know.
It's true because our institutions are really only formed at the end of the 1960s, right?
Hmm.
So most of those institutions are comparatively new.
Hmm.
The other thing that we do have is things like fringe festivals, to
Hmm.
bring things back around,
Yeah.
which have become one of the necessary pieces to building a career in the theater. Is self-production, and in a venue like the Fringe or other festivals, to like get your work seen and to have a body of work, or to have like roles under your belt. It's a great way to start a career that has staying power.
Mhm.
And I think that that's one of the benefits to festivals as a whole, and Fringe especially, because the theater world sort of really coalesces around the Fringe. It's like the only time of year when you can be guaranteed to run into almost everybody
Mhm. Mhm.
at a show, which is kind of amazing.
Mhm.
I know that you contributed music to a play called Echo for the Edmonton Fringe Festival, but
Mhm.
did you get to go out to Edmonton for that?
No, I didn't get to go out to Edmonton to see it. So that play was written by a classmate of mine, Cole Durnford. So we did it as a fourth year project. Like that, we have this like new voices festival at at TMU, which is kind of your fourth year. You write, produce, and make your own shows. So I made music for that, and then that got picked up by Next Stage, and then went out to Edmonton for a bit. Um, yeah, that was like really kind of an experiment for me. I started making music. Um, I think in my gap year between high school and university. Like I said, I mean, I've always like sung and been musical, but I never really thought of making my own music. But yeah, I kind of was just messing around with some stuff, and Cole was like, "Do you want to make music for the show?" And I was like, "Sure." But that was a really sort of fulfilling and gratifying experience, and a nice way to like. I was like, it was nice to find another avenue in which I could like contribute to a piece of theater without directly being on stage. Yeah, but Cole's great. He
Yeah.
has a show out in Edmonton right now called Horseplay, which is their new theater lab out there. So yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Now Zeitgeist has had a workshop
Mhm.
previously. But this Fringe Festival is like the premiere of its current iteration, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, what did you learn from the workshop of the production?
Oh man, I learned a lot. That was 2 years ago now, and I just rented a studio at the Tarragon and just had a bunch of my friends and folks that I knew come see it. Uh, yeah, I learned a lot in terms of the rhythms of the play, obviously, and like I think for me, workshops are primarily it's just about the act of having an audience sit in a room and you start to see your own work differently. Like I think feedback in workshops is like almost unless it's from a dramaturg, I think the actual feedback people tell you is almost entirely useless. I maybe that's a hot take, and I apologize to anyone that like I don't know. You may get the occasional like nugget of wisdom, but I think anything that's really useful is going to come from a dramaturg. I don't know. You seem like you had.
No, it's interesting because I think that because I've done workshops um, with two different methods. One where you learn from how the audience reacts, and then you say, "Does anybody have any questions?" And you get a lot of not so much a question, but a comment, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then I've done other ones where somebody who is acting as dramaturg has targeted questions
Yeah.
for the audience. You don't open it up to like wide open questions, but you have specific things. This is what we want to know from the audience, and you ask
Yeah.
those questions and nothing else, and you can get
Totally.
the information that you want to know. But again, when you just open it up to questions from an audience, or
Yeah.
suggestions from the audience, it is often like not what you need for the show.
Exactly. And it's like, what the audience gives you is amazing. I mean, they give you their attention. You can see when they're bored, when they laugh, when they don't laugh. Like, all of that information is extremely valuable. But I think having a dramaturg in the room is just like, they're craftspeople, so they can very
Yeah.
quickly, like, take a look at what's holding up the play and very quickly identify, like, that's what's not working. Like, you're missing something there. You need something else there. Yes, but I also learned something valuable in terms of, like, my thing when I started writing this show was I wanted to write the show that I needed to see on stage at that moment, but didn't exist yet. I was like, "Man, I wish I could go out tonight and go see this show and come away feeling a little bit better about this state of, like, hopelessness that I'm feeling as a young person right now." And I think there was a moment when we were just kind of rehearsing the show in the hours prior to the workshop, and I remember just looking at the cast and I'm like, "This is it. Like, this is the show that I need to see right now." And then we finished the workshop, and then I think some people liked it, some people didn't like it, some people resonated with certain bits of it, some people didn't resonate with other bits, and I kind of was like, there comes a certain point in your writing where you reach the limit of other people's input, I think, and I think I reached it right there, and I was like, "I like this show, and I like what we've done with it, and I think I'm gonna change it a bit more, but I think it's about cooked," And I think I was sort of under the impression that, like, that I could just kind of keep changing this thing and keep, um, trying to, make an audience understand it or like it in a different way, but I think I was like, "Oh, you do reach a limit," and you're like, at the end of the day, you kind of do have to make the thing that, um, you feel like you need to see, and hopefully it resonates with some other people, and chances are that it will. Yeah.
Well, you're never going to satisfy everybody. There's
Yeah,
no way
yeah.
that ever you're not there's a show that satisfies everybody is kind of enjoyed by nobody. Like
Totally.
it's an impossible or at least it won't be memorable to
Mhm.
anybody. And you're right. A show at a certain point you have to decide I've workshopped this enough.
Yeah,
There's
done.
there's it's done. Because you can write and rewrite forever,
And never
but at a
finish.
certain point, an audience, a proper audience, needs to see the full thing realized.
Mhm, mhm.
And speaking of that, with Zeitgeist premiering at the Toronto Fringe, having gone through that workshop, and sort of like being in rehearsal right now, Fringe is almost on us. And in fact, when this airs, it's only going to be like a few short days away.
Oh,
What are
don't
you
say
most
that,
looking
Phil. Oh
forward
my
to? No,
god.
I listen. You still at this moment, you still have time. When this airs, you
Right,
have no time.
right.
So just. But what are you most looking forward to about having audiences finally see this show?
Oh, man, so much. I mean, yeah, we're just having some great moments in rehearsal where it's like, God, we just can't wait for people to come in and see it. I mean, I think the play holds a lot in it. I think it's really deeply funny. I think there's parts of it that people are gonna resonate with and see themselves in, especially if you're an artist in this city. If you're like a Torontonian, there's gonna be moments like it's very specific to the city and what it means to live in the city. And yeah, it's like it's kind of an energetic mashup of a few different forms. So there's projections, like I said, there's some film stuff that's gonna be going on. The foundation of it is that it's just a play, but then there's like a movement sequence right in the middle of a play where we in the middle of the show where the show kind of breaks out of itself. So yeah, I'm just excited for an audience to experience these people, these characters, kind of wrestling with what it means to be alive right now. I think whether you're a young person or not a young person, I think just the collective act of us sitting there being like, what are we gonna do, guys? This is a lot right now. This feels like a lot. I think people will resonate with that and come out of the show a little bit more hopeful and a little bit more in community with the group of 100 or so people that they just sat through this thing with.
Sounds super exciting. It sounds amazing. Ben, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time, and looking forward to seeing Zeitgeist at the Toronto Fringe.
Thanks so much, Phil. Thanks for having me.